Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here, and we're breaking new ground with looking at the events that you get in the security log for the Windows Firewall. I want to thank SpecterSoft for making today's real training for free session possible. SpecterSoft is a new first-time sponsor with UltimateWindowsSecurity.com, and as you're going to see, they've got an awesome log management solution that I think you'll be amazed how affordable it is as well. And a lot of you over the years have said, man, we need something that we can actually afford, that we've got budget for. And that's what you're going to see today. I'm going to be using SpecterSoft Server Manager as my query tool as I show you these events during the webinar. And then Jack Doyle and his colleagues will give you a brief demo of SpecterSoft and talk about its pricing afterwards. But let's get into the real training, and that is, what are the events that we can monitor about the Windows Firewall? Well, we're going to show you that you can monitor configuration changes. You can also monitor the actual activity of the firewall as far as, what is it blocking, what is it allowing. And then there are a bunch of events that also get logged whenever the firewall starts up. It basically just dumps out its current configuration policy. And that maybe is something that you want. On the other hand, I think for a lot of us, it's going to be data that we want to suppress either in our Windows audit policy if possible, or at least reject that data from going into our log management SIM solution, because it is really voluminous and it's not really event data. It's just like dumping out a baseline of your configuration to an event log, which to me doesn't really seem appropriate. But anyway, I digress. The other area that isn't listed here is health. There's also events that will let you know if there's kind of a health problem with Windows Firewall as well. So here are the Windows audit policies that give you firewall events, and they are scattered between 5 different audit policy subcategories. So in fact, I'm going to go over to Windows for this. Let's bring up the local security policy tool. But certainly, folks, in the real world, you wouldn't want to use the local security policy tool for systems joined to the domain. You'd want to configure this to be a group policy, right? But the interface is the same. So first of all, under object access, there's 2 categories that have to do with the firewall. And in Windows, a lot of times you'll see the term filtering platform rather than firewall. So if you see filtering platform, just think firewall. So here under object access, we have audit filtering platform connection, and we've got audit filtering platform packet drops. Okay, so I think the name kind of gives you a hint as to what those mean. We'll drill down into those events. Also under policy change, there are 2 categories there. Filtering platform policy change and the MPS SVC rule level policy change categories. When you see MPS SVC, again, that is part of the filtering platform or Windows Firewall. I can't remember exactly what that is an acronym for, but the bottom line is those are firewall events. So there's 2 categories that claim to document policy changes in Windows Firewall, which we want to know about, right, in case like a local admin is dumbing down the Windows Firewall, and that's going to create risks for us, as just one example. Also, we can get health information from our other system events category about Windows Firewall, like is Windows Firewall failing to start up because of a misconfiguration? We'd certainly want to know about that, right? Okay, so those are the categories that we're going to talk about, and those are the same ones that you've got in your slides there. Hey, by the way, folks, use the question feature of GoToWebinar to send me all of your questions, either for the Windows Firewall events that we discuss, or for SpectorSoft Server Manager, or it doesn't even have to be a question. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear your thoughts, even if you don't agree with me. please share all that. We'll try to make this as interactive as possible. I'll get to some questions immediately. Other questions I'll save towards the end, just so I can manage our schedule. Okay, well, let's drill down into our first type of activity, and that is tracking packet drops. So the firewall gets a packet, and then for whatever reason, whichever rule, it decides to drop that packet. How do we track that? Well, there are two categories that provide events on this. First of all, there's the obvious one, which is packet drop. Okay, and that gives us two events: 5152, 5153. And as you guys know, the security log is just cryptic, and it's just a morass of black art knowledge, right? And so there's quite a few events here that are documented but don't ever seem to be logged. So I see examples of this event all the time. But there's this other one about a more restrictive filters blocked a packet. I don't know. I've never seen that logged. That doesn't mean that it's never logged. It could just be that the way I've configured my Windows firewall rules and experimented with them, and then the packets that I've sent just haven't triggered this. So I would go ahead and include it in my criteria, but don't be surprised if you don't see it, if that makes sense. The other weird thing is, beginning with Windows 2008 R2, Microsoft added two new event numbers, 5150 and 5151, which they talk about blocking packets, right? Yet they're under the connection category. So my question is, what are those events doing in this category? The good news is I haven't seen these events logged. So I think this is just kind of bogus stuff. So bottom line is, this is the big event to look for and to expect to see if Firewall is blocking packets. Let's look at some examples of that event. So what I've done is, here in SpectorSoft Server Manager, I've created 5 filters under one group. So we've got a Windows Firewall filter group. See, we're here under filters, and I've got packet drops and connection blocks. I've grouped those together, and then we've got a few others that we'll be looking at. Let's see what we've got as far as packet drops here on this system. Whoops, fat-fingered that one. There we go. Okay, so here's an example. The Windows filtering platform, when you see that, of course, think Windows Firewall, has blocked a packet. So there's no application name here because this was, notice, an inbound packet. We get really nice information here. So first of all, we get the direction. The direction was, it was out on the network, it was coming into our system, so it was inbound. And then it gives us the source address, source port, and the destination address and destination port. Now, this one was a broadcast packet. How can we tell? Because of the destination address, that last octet being 255. But we can find other examples. There you go. In fact, it also logs, notice, TCP version 6 packets as well. And in addition to that, we're also getting the protocols so that we know whether this was TCP, UDP, or something else. But this is great for two things. If you have a Windows system exposed to a hostile network and you want to see, what are people hitting me with, here's your record right here. Here's your blocked packets that were dropped, that is. Also, if you're trying to troubleshoot a network activity problem because, and you suspect the firewall has something to do with it, why then this is one of the first places that you're going to start. And what I've done is I've also grouped in here connection blocks, because as you'll see, they have something to do with this as well. So events that come in, packets that come in uninvited, right? They're inbound, and they don't meet a rule, exception rule. This is what generates the events that you see here. Let's see. What else did I want to bring out? Interesting. Devin says that he's getting plenty of 5150 and 5151 events. Well, Devin, please send me some examples of them so that we can get them documented in the security log. And maybe from those events I can determine why you get them, but we haven't seen them here in this lab. Okay, let's see here. Next. So those are packet drops. Now, what about connection events? There's a couple things here. Windows primarily documents connection events from the point of view of a server. Well, it can go two ways. First of all, let's talk about server programs here on our computer. So let's say we're going to start up a FTP server. All right, in Windows or in TCP communications, the way this works is the server program starts up and says, hey, network stack, or hey, Windows, I need to open up port such and such, and I want to listen for inbound connections. And when an inbound connection comes in, then I want you to give me a socket. I'll spin off a separate thread usually to communicate and receive and send data over that socket. So what Windows then does is whenever a program says, hey, I'm FTP server, I want to open up port, I forget, whatever it is, for FTP. Why then Windows Firewall looks at its rules over here. Let's just give you the context. Looks at its rules and says, well, is there a rule that allows incoming FTP? And more specifically, is there a rule that allows you, Mr. FTP.exe, to open up that port? So if you remember in Windows Firewall, you can get very specific with regard to not just opening up a certain port. That's what I've done here. I've created an inbound HTTP rule that opens up port 80. But see, we could lock that down and say, look, I don't want just any program opening up port 80. That could be a backdoor program, a Trojan horse. Instead, I want to limit this to not all programs, but this specific program, whatever my web server is, Apache or IIS or whatever. Okay, so what I'm getting at then is that Windows then tracks those rules, and whenever a program tries to open it up, if it allows the program to do it, then the event you're going to see is Windows filtering platform has permitted a bind. So that's the first thing. You bind to the port, then you begin listening for incoming connections. That's the sequence in TCP communications. You'll see why I'm making a point of this in just a second. On the other hand, let's say you're a server program, you try to open up a port that you have not been permitted. Windows is going to block that bind, and the important word is bind. Okay, now the next thing that a Windows program does is it begins to listen and wants to accept connections on that port. And you see there's also a block and permit rule there too. But the interesting thing is you're not going to see 5131s very often. Why not? Because you can't start accepting incoming connections on a port until you have first bound to it. So if you want to be able to see what are my programs that are being blocked from listening for inbound connections, this is the event to look for, 5158. Let's go see if we have any over here. And let's see here. What we have, Well, we've got some blocked connections, and that was an inbound connection. But in this case, I don't have any blocked ports, but let's show you what one looks like in the Windows security log. So 5158. You know, to get that kind of event, you need to start up a server program that wants to open up a port that you've not permitted access to. And so here, when that happens, here's what it looks like. Oh yeah, this is cool. Windows filtering platform has, whoops, that's the wrong one. Bear with me. What am I really looking for? 5159. Okay, here we go. So Windows filtering platform is blocked to bind to a local port. The program was LSASS, Local Security Authority System Service. The source port was 389. If you look that up, that is the well-known port for LDAP, if I remember correctly. But the bottom line is, you see how even a system service on Windows is not allowed to open up and listen for incoming connections unless your Windows firewall actually permits it. And there's an example of it right there. Let's see, I've got a couple questions here. We'll come back and talk about your questions here in a second. Devin, I understand you can open specific applications, but you can restrict it to a specific path or possibly a hash of a program. Okay, so Dave says, I understand you can open up specific applications, but can you restrict it to a specific path or possibly a hash of a program? No, Dave. So, Dave, if you're worried about a bad guy replacing a server program with another or possibly infecting that server program and patching it with some bad guy code, Windows Firewall is not going to catch that. You're going to have to rely on other software, other security tools to prevent that. Let's see here. Jesse says, so without a program accepting the port, you can't actually see it? I'm not sure. Come back to me and help me out on that with what you mean by that. Devin, file integrity checking. Yeah, that's going to go a long ways to what you're looking for there with some of the other questions that we just had, because Windows Firewall is not going to hash the program and see, oh, is this really this program? Has it been changed? It's just saying, you know, if an executable starts up and the executable is this name and resides in this path, will it be allowed to open up these ports? Okay, let's see here. Now, on the other hand, what about when connections are allowed? So Windows Firewall also logs those. Now, of course, you can expect to see a lot of events in that case, right? Because every single time you connect to a program, even as a client program, right? Even as a client program, you're going to be getting events. So what can you do about that? Because let's think about this for a second. We may very well want to have an audit list of, you know, an audit trail of connections that were blocked and packets that were dropped, but do we want an audit trail of every single port that was opened, every single connection? So that includes when you make outbound connections to, you know, some other server. Well, some of you, you know, will want this. Some of you absolutely will want that, even though it's going to be a lot of information, so that you have an audit trail of communication that's taking place. On the other hand, if you don't, then here are some possibilities. Notice that the packet drops and the blocked connections, notice what kind of events those are. These are failure events. See that? Failure audit. So what we could do is create a filter that says, and here's what I'm getting at, because of the audit policy, let's go look at our audit policy real quick. Make sure that you understand my point. Here in local security policy, yeah. You see, we can only turn on auditing for connections. We can't say, there is not a second category that says block connections or allowed connections. But the good news is blocked connections are recorded as failure events. Connections that are allowed are logged as success events. So here's what you could do. At this point, we're only going to log when connections and packets are dropped or blocked. We won't get that voluminous list of every single connection that does happen. Now, what I really wish is that there was a way that we could log inbound connections but not log outbound connections. There's no way to configure that with your Windows audit policy. On the other hand, that is something that you could configure with your log management solution, hopefully, like with SpectorSoft Server Manager. If you want to see it later on, Jack and his colleagues could show you how you could prevent those events from being archived or being processed. So the point that I always make with stuff like this is you cannot configure all of the noise out of the Windows security log. You have to accept that a certain amount of noise is going to be generated, and it's the responsibility of your audit reduction solution, which is the academic name for log management and SIMS, in order to get rid of that data for you. Okay. All right, so that's tracking connections then. Let's step away from tracking what Windows Firewall is doing, and let's talk about what is happening to Windows Firewall. So now Windows Firewall is not the actor, it's the object. And the important thing here is we need to know when configuration changes are made on Windows Firewall, because that could open up all kinds of vulnerabilities and exposures, right? It could increase our attack surface. The configuration, having configuration control over your Windows Firewall on all of your different servers, maybe even your workstations, is really important. And it shouldn't be that hard to keep up with, because this is the sort of thing that once we've configured it, it's basically keep it that way, and just let me know if there's any changes, and then I can track them down and make sure those are legitimate, controlled changes. And that's the term I'm thinking about. This is all part of change control. So how do we do that? This is the main category you want to watch, the NPS SVC rule level policy change category. And that's this one down here in your group policy. Here under the major category policy change subcategory, that one right there. That's the one we want. If we turn that one on, we are going to get events when rules are added, when rules are modified, when rules are deleted. What if someone goes into Windows Firewall and does this? What if they go into Windows Firewall and they just say, let's restore to our default policy? Bam. Well, then, we've got an event for that as well. And then what else have we got here? What if some other setting, not a rule level setting, but one of the other settings in Windows Firewall is changed, like disabling the domain profile or the public profile? All right, we've got events for that too, 4950. Now, there are some other noise events in this category, but really there's not that much. The big noise comes from The other category that you would think is really important, that is the filtering platform policy change category. But as you'll see, well, let me not get ahead of myself. First of all, let me show you some examples of these good events right here under MPS. Back to SpectorSoft, and this time the filter that I want is firewall configuration changes. And so over the past 90 days, we've had 3 configuration changes. And these events are really nice and easy to read. You see what happened here? First of all, Windows Firewall setting was changed. The profile that was changed is the domain profile. Remember how Windows Firewall has 3 profiles. I think it's domain, private, and public. And look at that. The Windows Firewall was disabled for domain connections. And then a little bit later, it was turned back on. It was enabled. And then what happened up here? Aha. A change was made to the Windows Firewall exception list. A rule was added. This applies to all profiles, all 3 profiles. The rule name, inbound HTTP. Now, one thing you'll notice is Windows doesn't log the actual configuration settings, all of the properties of that rule, but at least it gives us the name of the rule, so we can say, we're not expecting a new rule to be changed, and furthermore, that name's a little suspicious. Regardless of whether the name was suspicious or not, though, you see, we could then go over to our Windows Firewall configuration. We can find that rule. There it is right there. And we can explore it, see what its settings are, and determine whether or not that was appropriate. So really nice, easy to read events here that we're getting in the security log. And these filters were really easy to build. So this is just this is showing you what the filter looks like. We're saying that log equals security, and that the event number took place between 4946 and 4950. And Jack, I love how easy it is to create more criteria here. I can even, put in parentheses and have, subgroups of criteria. I can change my and or. It's really, really slick. I'm so often with criteria design dialogues, filter criteria design dialogues, I'm kind of limited and just wish I could get in there and edit the code myself. But you did an awesome job with the GUI on that. All right, so that's tracking firewall policy changes. Now, why are we saying to stay away from this category in most cases? Well, I'll show you what we get. What we want is all event IDs, and then we're going to change this to policy change and filtering platform change. Let's see, let me show you the events that you get here. Remember how I was saying that Windows will dump out every single time it starts up, it'll dump out all of the events, or not all the events, all of the configuration settings, every last rule of the Windows Firewall. And these are the events that do that. The following callout, the following filter or provider was present when the Windows filtering platform base filtering engine started. And so when you look in your security log, you're going to see gobs and gobs of those events. Let's go see if I can show you an example of that in our lab. And for this, I'm going to use Event Viewer. I haven't created filters because I don't normally want to look at all of these events. Get down here to Microsoft. Where are you? Oh, it's Windows, sorry. You know what, I cannot find it by the event sources. I'm having some kind of mind block, so let's just turn that off. Go back to all event sources. There, that's what I want. And then my event IDs that I'm looking for here are 5440 through 5444. Okay, and we're not getting events in this case because I've probably turned that stuff off. But you guys can imagine, you know, what that would be like and the quantity of events that you get if you turn this category on. So for most purposes, I'm viewing this category as a noise category and recommending that you leave it disabled. Now, what about firewall health? What if, you know, there's a lot of problems that can occur with Windows Firewall. What if it can't get its security policy? What if the security policy is corrupt and it can't parse it? What if it just fails to start for any reason? These are all what I would consider firewall health issues, and we can track them, but they're tucked away under a different category called other system events. And that corresponds to this category right here in your group policy objects. Here under system, you look at other system events. That's the category that's going to generate your Windows Firewall health events. And the ones that I'm particularly interested in that could indicate a health problem, because some of the events that are logged, right, are good. Windows Firewall started successfully. The firewall driver started successfully. All right, we don't want to investigate those events every day. We expect to see that. So what I've done over here in SpectorSoft for today's webinar is put together a filter that just shows me my Windows Firewall health problems. And actually, let's view it this way. So we'll switch to health problems here. And we've got a few issues to look at. Notice in this case, I went ahead and allowed my startup events to show just so that you could see some events, because Firewall here on this system is running just fine. It's interesting, look at the computer name. You can see where the computer name was changed from when it first started up to later, and even later when it became part of the domain. But that's just a little bit of trivia. But you see how with the right criteria, we can easily track whenever there's a health problem on our Windows Firewall. If we take away those two successful events and our filter shows up empty, we can conclude from that Windows Firewall is running just fine. Okay. So that's firewall status and health. And basically just a recap there that these are your noise events for Windows Firewall. And let's see here. There are a few even inside of the MPS category that you will probably consider to be, what am I trying to say, noise as well. And that's 4944 and 4945. It's again the same thing, that when Windows Firewall starts up, it just dumps this huge amount of information into the log. Here's a few other tips for you. If I were you, I would enable all of these categories on servers that are exposed to the internet. That is, all of the categories with the exception of the, with the exception of the filtering platform policy change category. I would recommend against turning that off in most cases. So, but let's turn on the other ones that we discussed. Now, what about systems where your firewall is considered a critical control? Then we definitely want to turn on other system events and the MPS category, because that's what's going to allow us to monitor the health and status and configuration changes of Windows Firewall. What about for verifying that the firewall is actually blocking packets and allowing packets? What about for troubleshooting? Well, that's when you get into the filtering platform, packet drop, and connection. And remember to separate these by success and failure. That can be very useful there, depending upon what your particular audit situation is. Oh, and one other thing. Some of the events in Windows Firewall give you a process ID. That is when the event is connected to a local program that's running. Well, so you'll get a process ID. If you're interested in knowing, well, when did that program start? Who started that program? Which parent program started that program? You can find all that out by correlating backwards in the security log, looking for event ID 4688. That's your process start event. And it will match. It will have the same process ID as the process ID in your Windows Firewall events. So that's pretty cool. If a firewall event lists a particular process and you want more information about that process, how it got started and so on, then look backwards in time for 4688 with the same process ID. So the bottom line is we can track the policy, the status, the health, and the activity of Windows Firewall. Enabling Windows Firewall policy change tracking is going to generate some noise. It's the job of your SIM to filter that out. Oh, here's a key thing. So the policy changes. So let's say a rule is added to the exception list of Windows Firewall. It's probably not going to tell you the whodunit. And that's true if the policy change was made through group policy. Why is that? Well, when Bob edits a group policy object and adds a firewall exception rule to that GPO, he is not directly changing any firewall on any Windows system on your network. Instead, what he's modifying is an object in Active Directory. And there are ways that you can audit group policy changes in Active Directory. But anyway, that change is made there. Then all your different Windows systems are going to see, oh, there's a change to group policy. Oh, and it does apply to me because I'm in that OU or whatever. And so then they make that change. So the fact that the Windows Firewall policy on that system has changed is logged, but the whodunit is system, because it's the operating system that actually saw that GPO and made the change on its local configuration. So a lot of cool stuff that you can get with Windows Firewall, either as an audit trail or as a troubleshooting, or just as a way, I would say it's primarily important as a assurance that our Windows Firewall is healthy, that it's active, and that its configuration has not been weakened. That's where I would say we have the most general applicability from a security point of view for the events that we talked about today. Now today I was using SpecterSoft's Server Manager, and you've seen a little bit about how easy it is to analyze events and create filters, but there's so much more to it. And the thing that is really amazing about this is it's powerful, but it's also really affordable. So I hope you enjoyed just seeing a little bit about the capabilities here. And Jack, I'm going to make you the presenter, and then we'll get back here and answer these questions that people have. But please keep those questions coming in, either for security log events or for SpecterSoft.
Thank you, Randy. Are you all able to see? Are you able to see my screen now, Randy?
Yeah. Yeah, you look fine.
Excellent. Thank you. That's me. That's what I look like right there. So my name is Jack Doyle. I'm a sales engineer at SpectorSoft. I have about 16 years of experience in IT. In a previous life, I was a sales engineer at ScriptLogic and then Quest Software for about 7 years. A little bit about SpectorSoft very briefly. Our company was founded in 1998. We have corporate headquarters based here in Florida. We also have branch offices in Utah and also in the United Kingdom. We have about 36,000 or more companies using SpectorSoft solutions to detect insider threats. And we have also, for 8 times consecutively, been Inc. 500 and 5,000 award recipients, which is a nice thing there. As you can see here, SpectorSoft customers do span the entire spectrum of the vertical markets. Although certain markets are more inclined to require monitoring software, and monitoring requirements do exist across all verticals, and these are just a few of our current customers. The problems that IT managers and administrators are facing are pretty obvious to everyone on this call, so we're not really going to spend too much time on this slide. Everybody knows the issues that they're currently facing: regulatory compliance issues, cyber attacks, failing compliance audits, network downtime, and so forth. Server Manager is going to provide you with event log management and consolidation capabilities, not just Windows event logs, but we also can consolidate and monitor text logs and logs from syslog devices in the same way. Application and resource monitoring, including disk monitoring, security event reporting, alerting and responding to those critical server events. Those are all some of the capabilities of SpectorSoft Server Manager. My screen just flickered for a second. Are you still able to see my screen, Randy? Also with Server Manager, you will have event log management. You can monitor, consolidate, archive, audit, and report on any of your logs in real time. Quickly identify security issues with security event reporting. You can ensure maximum uptime by monitoring and controlling your Windows services, applications, and processes. We do have application monitoring capabilities in the product, so that's kind of unrelated to what we were talking about today with the Windows Firewall and the event logs. That functionality is in Server Manager as well. And then also disk monitoring, so you can monitor disk space across your servers in your environment. Before we get to the demo, I do want to mention there's a 20-day evaluation available at SpectorSoft.com. And the pricing for Server Manager does start at $425 to monitor 20 nodes. However, it does remain affordable regardless of the size of your environment. So we're going to jump over to my VMware lab here real quick. So I have 2 installations of Server Manager that we're going to look at today. We're going to start very briefly here at the beginning with, for all intents and purposes, what is a empty installation, a brand new installation, just a base configuration here. We haven't added any devices or hosts or anything. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. Under computer devices and hosts, I'm going to add a group. I have OCD, so I like to keep everything as nice and neat as I possibly can, so it's very easy for me to manage and keep track of everything. So I'm going to create a Windows servers group here. The great thing about having groups in Server Manager is that when you have servers or devices that have similar characteristics, you can put them into these groups, and then you can apply configuration templates, which we're going to look at in just a moment. You can apply those to the groups, and then those configurations are inherited by all of the devices that are in those groups. And also your devices can live in multiple groups, which is great too, because then you could have a Windows servers group, and you could also have a domain controllers group or a SQL servers group, and you could put servers into the different groups based on their qualities or their attributes, and then you could then import the templates or inherit the templates onto the different computers within those groups. So now I'm going to add my 4 servers from my VMware environment here just by going to New Computer Device. I could type in server names if I want to and add them this way. But what I would like to do is browse Active Directory. So now I can browse through Active Directory and I can find all the different computers that I want to add. And my environment's very small, but in a larger environment it might be useful to search Active Directory. So we can do that, and we can search for computers by name, but we can also use filters. And Randy was showing you guys some filters here earlier for looking through the event log for the firewall events, but we can also create filters for Active Directory. I've got a filter here that will find all of the computers in my environment that are running a server version of Windows. And I can just hit search, and it's going to search recursively through Active Directory and find all of those. If I go to the Edit Filter button here, we can see here it's just a very simple filter, but we can add any attributes that we'd like, so we can look for particular computers in our Active Directory if we'd like to do that. So now I've found my 4 different servers. I'm going to select those and then add them in Server Manager. And now we can see here under my Windows Servers folder, we've got our 4 different servers. So it's very easy to begin collecting the event logs from these servers. Right out of the box, we do have a sample event log consolidation template, so I'm going to go into that right now and just view the properties of it. We're not really going to change anything. For the most part, if you're just looking for your application, system, and security event logs, then this template is configured right out of the box, and all you have to do is apply it to your servers. But I am going to go through the properties of it real quick just so you can see what's available here. Again, I like to be very nice and neat with the way I configure my product here or my installation. So I'm going to indicate on the name of this template what it is that I want to collect. So I can very easily look back through here and tell right at first what it is that I'm going to be collecting or what the template's doing. And then I'm going to specify how often I want this template to execute. We have 2 different types of schedules in Server Manager. They're fixed and they're range schedules. Fixed schedules are going to be what you would normally think of when it comes to scheduling. For example, every Thursday at 4:30 p.m., daily at 1 a.m., every hour at the top of the hour, and so forth. Range schedules, on the other hand, range schedules will automatically distribute the execution of the template across a period of time. For example, if you're going to use the every 1 hour range schedule and assign it to 12 hosts, it's going to execute 1 every 5 minutes. Or if you were to use the every 12 hours range schedule against the same 12 hosts, it would execute 1 an hour. So that just distributes the execution of those templates across a period of time, avoiding bottlenecks and so forth on your network, on your Server Manager server, and even in your database server where you're storing your information. So I'm going to leave it at the default every 1 hour. And then I'm going to go to the Logs tab. The Logs tab allows me to select which event logs I want to consolidate into Server Manager. And this template, by default, automatically selects the application, system, and security event logs. We can select any other ones that we'd like here. We can also add a computer that we've added to Server Manager, and it will query that computer and show us which logs are available on that computer, and we could add any that we'd like, or any third-party logs. If we don't see any on our servers, we could type in the name of a log if we want to. And any of your Microsoft application event logs are also available. So over on the Consolidation and Monitoring tab, here we can select some different options for different logs. In this case, I'm going to leave it selected to all to apply my options globally to all of them. And Randy, this is what you were talking about earlier. If you wanted to filter what information is being pulled into Server Manager. So if you had your event logs keeping connection information for both incoming and outgoing connections and so forth, but you only wanted to collect the information about incoming connections on your firewall, this is where you could do that. So on our security log, for example, instead of saving all entries, what we could do is say that we wanted to save entries that pass a consolidation filter, and then we would use one of our filters, and I don't have that example at this moment, but we could create a filter that would just show the log entries that we want, and we could use that filter here, so when those logs are collected from those servers, we're only going to store the entries that pass a filter.
Yeah,
so that's
Jack, that's awesome, because it's a weakness that you see in some solutions that they can't filter out events from being stored in the first place, or else it's really hard. But the earlier you can suppress noise events in your log management process, the better. So that's great. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. So if you want to collect all of the information, if you've got the storage space for it and you really want to collect it, that's fine, and then you can filter it when you view it or when you report against it, and it's all there. But if you don't want to collect it at all, you could certainly apply this filter, and then your event logs could still have that information in them if you really absolutely needed it, but you don't have to store it in Server Manager if you don't want to. Also, I'm not going to go into great detail about the retention policy, but I do have the default retention policy selected here. And the retention policy is just used to configure how long you want to keep information in your primary log repository before you archive it into a secondary repository or just get rid of it altogether. So that's where you're going to configure that. So now that we've configured this template, I haven't made any changes to it really. So what I'm going to do is just take that template and drag it onto my Windows servers folder. I'm going to select the link, and now what you can see is it's going to apply that configuration template to all of those servers, and then within the next few minutes it's going to go out and collect all of those event logs that we've specified. Rather than wait, I'm going to go ahead and ask it to do it now, so we're going to collect that information very quickly here, and then we can drill down and actually look at that information and see it here in just a moment. I've told it to only collect a day's worth of information, so it should go very quickly. And then as it moves forward, obviously, it's just going to collect the new information since the last time it checked. So it's finished there. I'm going to shrink these down so we can see a little bit better. I'm going to go to the log repositories node in the tree here and expand this out. And now we're going to see our Windows servers folder, and we're going to see the different servers beneath it here, and I can expand into event logs, and we can see the different event logs that we've collected. So I'll just take the system event log and select to view the consolidated log entries, and now very quickly we're able to see that. And you had done a couple of things in your environment, Randy, that I was going to show how you did that here. We can change some of the filters around. If we don't want to see the informational entries, we can certainly turn those off. We can apply any filters that we may have created here. And also, what you did, what you had asked us about the other day and you had done in your lab, was you had grouped these by event. So we can just take any of these column headers and we can drag these up to the top. And now if I shrink them down, what we're going to see is that we've grouped all of these by event. So if you're looking for a specific event ID or all instances of an event ID, you could certainly expand that out, and then you could see that event ID. There are also some additional options here in Server Manager. You could take notes on a particular event if you need to do that. You could flag an event to follow up on it later. And just like you would expect, you could save the entries that have passed your filter, or the entries that you've got displayed here on the screen, export them, email them, whatever you'd like to do there. So you could certainly do that. We'll switch over to my other environment very quickly, where I've been collecting data for some time. So we've seen how easy it is to begin collecting the data, but now we're going to jump over here and look at what we've already collected. And I want to touch base on a couple of the built-in reports in Server Manager. You can also create your own reports, but we do have built-in reports for file system access. So if you're auditing the file system changes through a group policy, then you could certainly report on that information in Server Manager. I'm just going to select View Report here. I'm going to group, in this case, my results by the user. So I want to see all the activities of a specific user group together. I do have a filter that I've created. What this filter does, very simply, is just looks to make sure that the entries are coming from a particular host, and then the path that we're looking at, which is my department share. Specify our date and time range. Then we also have the ability to include or exclude specific users from our report, or limit results to valid Active Directory user accounts. And what's nice about this is it will exclude things like system and so forth. I'm just going to select the option here to view my report. I'm going to give it just a moment while it queries the database for the results. And now here we go. We can see all of the events by each specific user. And these are the different file system events that have taken place in that department share folder that I've created in all of its subfolders. And any of these events are interactive, so you can click on any of these and view the actual information that was generated by the Windows event log. These reports can be exported They can also be scheduled, so you don't have to come in here and look at them if you don't want to. You could have them emailed, exported to a share as a PDF, and so forth. And if we have a massive number of users, we could select the user that we want to see up here and see just that user's events. One of the other reports I'd like to show you would be our account management report. If I expand out my account management folder and take my account management report and view that, what we're going to see here, again, we have some options, but I'm just going to take the defaults. What we're going to see here are all events from Active Directory related to management of user accounts. So if I expand a few of these out here, we can see where an account was created and passwords were reset, accounts were enabled and disabled, and so forth. And again, we can see the actual event log information related to that. We do also have the ability to monitor the event logs in real time. So if you're looking for a particular event and you want to know, for example, when an account's created or deleted or locked out, Server Manager can notify you about that in real time. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time today, but I also want to mention that we do have the ability, as I said earlier, to monitor server resources, CPU utilization, memory utilization. We can verify that network applications are up and running. We could check your website and make sure it's functioning and not experiencing errors, and so forth. And then all of that information that we check is available also in report formats. We can also publish this information out to a web server so that you can access it from a browser or from your smartphone and so forth. And this is just an example of a very simple summary report that shows the latest results of CPU, memory, disk space utilization, and so forth on my different servers in my environment here. Like I said, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate everyone joining. So I'll hand it back to you, Randy, if you guys would like to handle the questions here. We could certainly answer any questions that anybody might have.
Yes, definitely. And please give us any of the questions you've got, either for the stuff that I talked about for Windows Firewall or what Server Manager can do. Let's start with Luis, who asks, will this tool allow me to generate a report to track firewall ports, configuration, and usage between applications? So I think you touched on that just a second ago, but Luis would like to know, could he, create some reports that document the kind of activity we're talking about today?
Oh, sure, Randy. It's all about the filters that you create. And what's really great is Randy can share the filters that he created during today's webinar. He's going to pass those on to me when we're finished, and we can make them available if you'd like them, and they can be imported directly into Server Manager. So what you can do is, as long as you've got the information being logged to the Windows event logs, Server Manager can collect it, and it can apply those filters. You can set up a report that applies those filters, and then daily or weekly or on demand, however you'd like, you can view just the entries that pass those filters anytime you'd like. So you could certainly do that. It's just a matter of applying the right filters, and if you'd like, we can get you the filters that Randy created and kind of save you the effort of having to create your own if you want.
All right. Dennis asked, does the manager connect to the servers based on a client, or is it permission-based? I wonder if he's talking about an agent. Do you understand his question, or do you want to ask for clarification, Jack?
Server Manager does have a service that runs on the server, and then there is a client application that's used to connect to it. I know Michael's on the call right now. Michael, he's the developer of the product, and I will defer to him if he'd like to touch base at all on the authentication mechanism that takes place behind there. Are you available real quick, Mike?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so there's no agents. It's an agentless system. It uses WMI to download those entries. So as far as authentication goes, it's just going to use, it's going to use the service credentials to log on to that remote server to access those logs. If the remote server is on a different domain, or it's not a domain at all, you can, of course, impersonate credentials to access those logs. And then they're just downloaded and saved, and like you said, you just apply the filter. It goes and queries the database, and applies the filter, creates the report, and sends that out. So there's really no other sort of access required. Does that answer the question?
Hey, Mike.
So.
Mike, just in case I interpreted the question slightly differently, so maybe you can answer it from this perspective too, just in case. I think you may have been asking about access to the client. So can just any random user that has the client connect up to the service and begin configuring it and so forth?
Oh, yeah, absolutely not. The client, the software, it's a client-server-based package, and the console, what we're looking at right here is the console, and as Jack had showed you, it connects to different services, different locations. When it connects, it's using Windows authentication. You can override that right there on this screen. You can see the username, password, domain. You can, of course, encrypt that communication as well if you need to encrypt those packets and give it a private key. So, yeah, so it's going to authenticate with your actual Windows credentials.
Cool. Rondal asks, if you do not store certain events in Server Manager, can Server Manager go back out to the event logs and retrieve this information for you later, or would that be a manual process? I'd like to weigh in on this first. If you make any decisions you make about, with any log management solution you have, any decisions you make about, I don't want these events, you need to view that as a permanent, irrevocable decision, because those events are going to eventually rotate out of the security log, because it doesn't have infinite storage on the local system. So you need to be careful about what I was suggesting, obviously, and only drop events that you absolutely know that I'm not going to wish I had them later. But any thoughts from you guys, since it was really directed to Server Manager, but really that's true across the board.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that too, Randy. I appreciate your allowing me to do that. Server Manager also has the ability, and this template that I'm showing right now looks very much like the one we looked at, but Server Manager also has the ability to back up the EVT and EVTX files from your Windows servers, and it can optionally zip those, password protect them, and even digitally sign those with a certificate if you'd like, and you can keep those for as long as you'd like to. So it can back those up to a share, and you can keep those however long you have the storage space to retain those. And if you ever need to, let's say you've consolidated only 75% of the entries and the other 25 you've discarded, you could go back and load those EVT and EVTX event log files into Server Manager if you'd like to, and look through the contents of those and so forth. But that part of it would be a manual process, but you certainly could keep the original event log files in their native format untouched for however long you need to, in case you ever need those in the future.
That's cool. That's a really nice feature. I wasn't aware you had it. And I see you've got the capability to compress it, encrypt it, and digitally sign it. That's the next thing that people always ask about.
Yes, sir. And then you could just have Server Manager place it anywhere that you have the storage to hang on to those things, and then it can optionally, as you see at the bottom option there, it has the ability to roll those out after a certain period of time, if you don't want to keep them forever. So that's one thing that you can do if that's necessary. And then you don't feel so bad about not consolidating every event, because if push came to shove and you absolutely needed it, you could go back and find it.
Very, very cool. All right. Srinivas asks, can it monitor network devices like firewalls and switches?
Yes, absolutely. Server Manager does act as a syslog server. I've got the real-time syslog viewer over here, and I do have a couple of devices in my lab that generate syslog messages. So it collects this information in real time, because that's just the nature of how syslogging works, and then it consolidates that information into the same location that Server Manager stores the event log information, though you obviously can't view them at the same time because they're inherently different types of data. But you can also do the same thing here. You can filter what goes in. So you can create filters and say, save all the entries that my firewall sends me, or send only entries related to this or that. So everything that you can do, I'm trying to think, I don't think I'm missing anything here, but anything that you can do with event logs in Server Manager, you can also do with any device that sends syslog information to.
Cool.
And then even text file-based logs like your IIS server log and your SQL Server error log, or even on a Linux server, if you're running Apache server, you could grab that text file log and consolidate that too.
That's good. That I'm going to jump ahead to David's question, Jack, because it's related to that. He says, can the tool also correlate logs in the Windows System 32 log files Firewall folder? Because there is a different set of logs we might cover someday, not the security log, but the actual text files of Windows Firewall.
I've never looked at those before. You said they're in System 32, and I guess they're somewhere here. So basically, they're just logs the firewall generates in text files. Is that correct, Randy?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
sure, absolutely. Server Manager can consolidate text file logs, and we have some really powerful options available there too. I've seen some really strange logs here recently that aren't always one entry per line. So you, instead of assuming that there's an entry per line, you can create regular expressions that say this is what an entry looks like when it begins, whether it takes 1 line or 3 lines, and we can go through those log files and we can consolidate entries from those text file logs just like we do with event logs and syslog information. In fact, if I go into my repository down here on my Linux server, the Apache log is a text log. So if I expand this folder out, here are some text logs that I'm consolidating, like this proxy access log or this Apache access log, and I can certainly view that in Server Manager. So you can consolidate text file logs the same way, regardless of where they come from.
Now, Eric says, for auditing file access, I assume these, I don't know what you mean by these, Eric, would have to be located on a Windows file server. So, Eric, what do you mean by these, and located on a Windows firewall as opposed to what? A NAS device or what? Come back to me with, oh, Eric says the files in question. Yes, a NAS. Oh, okay. So, well, I know that it depends upon the NAS device, but there's a lot of NAS systems out there that generate, that really give you the same Windows file auditing capability as Windows, and it's just a matter of using those APIs to get it. So I would imagine that Server Manager could pull those as well, but I'll leave that up to you, Jeff.
Yeah, we'd have to look at the specific NAS and just see what's there, but we could certainly take a look at that with you one-on-one. I can't, just like you can't, Randy, give a perfectly accurate answer in that situation. Neither can I, because everything is different. But you're right, a lot of them do generate what would appear to be a native Windows event log. They at least pretend to be Windows, and so those APIs can still retrieve that information and so forth. So as long as the auditing information can be written to an event log, then you can collect it. I've even got a Linux server in my environment here that I'm using Samba on to create a couple of Windows-type file shares, and I have it sending auditing information from the file share over through syslogging. So you could still possibly work that out one way or the other.
Let's see here. Eric has another question, and we may go back over some territory again with this, but is there an agent required? Let's handle that again.
No, there is no agent.
Okay, so we don't. All right, Stephen, is Server Manager a server-client application? Meaning, will the server run on a server OS, collecting logs, etc., while my Windows 7 machine will have the console and attached to it, attached to Server Manager as a client? That's from Stephen.
Yes, that answer is absolutely yes. You can, and the number of clients that you install has nothing to do with the licensing. So you can install Server Manager on the service and the console on your server, and then you could install the console. If you got 30 people in your IT department, all 30 of them could run the console and connect. And yeah, absolutely.
Gerard asks, is there a ability to compare configurations to a best practice standard? I don't know if that's something that's part of Server Manager or not, but they could use SecEdit to do that.
Right. Yeah. Server Manager. There may be something out of the box you could do, but it's not appearing to me at the moment. So no.
Brian asks, can you alert on system utilization problems like disk drive space running low?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. That's one of the key areas of functionality in Server Manager. So I've got a template up here. If we go to, let's say, my expand these servers out. I've got a disk space template that I've applied to all of these guys, and so then what I can do is let's take a look at the disk space template's properties real quick. What you can do is apply the disk space template, or you can create any number of them with different thresholds if you'd like, but then it watches either all of your drives on your server or just specific drives if you want, and then it looks for the disk space to fall below a certain amount or change by a certain amount between checks, and then it can certainly notify you when that happens, and you can even go in here and you can look historically at that disk space and even see it in a chart and so forth. So after a while, Server Manager is also able to predict for you when it estimates that the disk will reach capacity and so forth. So absolutely it can do that. It can notify you when it goes into a warning or a critical state, and then even when it recovers. And not just this, we can watch a specific directory and subdirectories if you'd like to, as opposed to a whole disk.
Huh. All right. I like that. That's neat, just being able to see what is the rate that it's growing at. That's pretty neat.
So you just configure it. In this case, I have it checking every hour. So what it's doing is every single hour it's looking, and based on how much it's changing hour to hour, up and down, it looks historically and can kind of predict, you know, the rate of change hourly, daily, and so forth, and then even predict for you when it might fill up.
Nice. Let's see here. Luis asks, Randy, what was the audit rule that you enabled to capture port binding events? And that audit policy was the, let's see here. That's under object access. It's the filtering platform connection. Filtering platform connection is the answer, Lewis. All right. Now, Jeff, how do you have real-time alerts if you have to schedule when logs are pulled in? That's kind of a philosophical, metaphysical debate that a lot of people like to have, Jack, about what is real-time. You know, nothing really in life is real-time, but...
Well, yeah, near real-time, but I can actually demonstrate that for you. We have a different type of template, and you can apply both to the same machine. So the template we looked at was the consolidation and monitoring template. So what it can do is consolidate the entries periodically, and it can notify you when certain entries meet a criteria. But for the real-time stuff, I'll go back up to my domain controller here, if you'll allow me 1 second. Actually, let's take this first one. I guess it doesn't matter. We have another template called Event Log Monitor. And so what I've done with this one, and this one, as you can see, this one is real-time. It doesn't consolidate anything. That template's left for that. This one just watches the event logs in real-time for particular events to occur. So I specify, in order to conserve resources, I'm only going to specify the event log I'm concerned about. And then over here, I'm going to specify the filters, and then what actions I want to take when an entry is created that matches that filter. So, for example, when an account's locked out, I might want to send Randy an email. But when an account's created, maybe Nick over here needs to see a pop-up on his desktop or something crazy like that. So I can actually demonstrate how this works. What I'm going to do is just, I'll lock out a user in my environment here. I'm just doing this remotely from my member server, so I'm going to say run as. I'm just going to do 5 bad passwords here real quick for this Will Smith user. And the 5th one, hopefully this is going to work. The 5th one is going to trigger the lockout. So there we go, and there's the notification. That could be an email. Email doesn't work so great in a demo because then we'd have to switch to the mail server and look at it. So I use a pop-up, which may or may not be what you want, but the action that it takes is completely up to you. You want it to run a script, you want it to send you an email, you want it to send you a text message, whatever you want is up to you. But in this case, now here we've got this particular event that we just generated, and it told me about that very quickly. So hopefully that answers your question. It's just a different configuration template that you apply to look for the specific things you want to know about in real time.
And you know, you made me think of something, and that is, if you're using WMI, I know that there is a way to set up oh, I can't remember the term, queries on WMI that really are real time, because what's happening is the selection criteria is happening inside of Windows in the WMI engine as it watches new events coming through. And so it's not like you're polling every few seconds to say, hey, any of these events happen yet? Hey, any of these events happen yet? You're actually, WMI actually gives you the capability that says, watch for this event and essentially send me a packet when it happens.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the way we're doing it. That'd be a question for Mike, who is still on the line. He's the genius that made this work. But, how he made it work, I have not a clue. But I do know that it works very well. But if you want to speak to it, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, it's using a WMI subscription.
Yeah, that's the term, WMI subscription. You say, let me know when these events happen, and as soon as they happen, Windows tells you. So that the watch and the blocking is done efficiently at the Windows source computer, right, Mike?
Yeah, so it's subscribed on all the events come over the wire, and then we apply that filter when they come across. And the reason we don't consolidate on the real time is because the real time, of course, if there was a network error or something like that, those entries would be lost because they're just events that go on the network. There's no guaranteed delivery of those events. So that's why the consolidation is polling it every hour. It's a guaranteed method to get all the data. You'll never miss any. Whereas with it's a best case scenario. If you have network issues that are occurring, then you have the potential to lose those entries, which is reason why we have all this other kind of monitoring in the software, so you can monitor your whole network. And when you have a network issue, you know that may have caused other issues, other events that may have been lost. And so you can do some duplication there by having some reports, some daily reports that show things that you summarize some of these real-time events that you're looking at.
Yeah. Eric asks, who would be a point of contact for additional questions or set up a demo for his organization?
That would be me. You can certainly reach out to me. My name is Jack Doyle. My email address is jdoyle@spectorsoft.com. I do believe that we'll be sending follow-up information to everybody who attended, and that contact information will be in there as well. And I can answer any questions you may have one-on-one, or like you just said, a demo. We can do whatever works for you.
All right, and I just sent that. I sent your email address out in reply there to that question to everybody. Let's see here. Dennis says, would you be able to run a log-on, log-off report for a historical period of time for a particular individual against all devices that you've pulled logs for?
Yes, we can do that. In fact, that's one I didn't show during the demo, but I do have some data there for that. Let's go. Log-on sessions, Windows, view report. I'm going to get rid of this because it stands in front of everything. And choose the log-on type that you're interested in, because as you know, Randy, log-on, there are different types of log-ons that mean different things. So it defaults to interactive and remote interactive, and then we can choose our date and time range. And again, this can be scheduled if you don't want to run it, interactively. But then we'll give it just a second to finish querying. It's just going through the database and finding those entries. Should go pretty quickly. There we go. So here we go. Now we've got that. And here's administrator, and you can see here where I logged in earlier this morning, and those sessions don't have a log off, any log off information, because they simply are still logged on.
Cool. Yeah. So, and that is a valuable report when you want to see what are all the systems that a given user is touching. So. Let's see here. Devin asks, so using a WMI subscription, you establish persistent tunnel to grab the logs. Does it interfere with any other services? And no, WMI is the way to go, especially WMI subscriptions, Devin. Michael has architected this the right way. So I'll take that one for you, Jack.
Thank you.
Devin came back and says, Randy, I scrubbed my SIM and it turns out I lied about event ID 5150 and 5151. Thanks a lot, Devin, because I was like, my goodness, I'm sure that we've never seen those events. So I'm glad.
You were getting your hopes up, Randy, that you were going to get a bunch of those, and now you're not.
Yeah, exactly. Devin says, that's awesome to hear about WMI subscriptions, agentless grabbing of events, and it is amazingly efficient. When I first read about WMI, I was like, oh, how's this going to work? But they actually did a good job with it at Microsoft. Let's see here. Oh, Brian says, yeah, he did a scrub of his system too, didn't find any 5150s or 51s. So thanks a lot for getting back on me on that, guys. Let's see here. Some questions for me. I like this other question that Devin asked. Malware will generate these logs by creating a raw socket on the machine, correct? Yes, that's true. So if you've got malware, and that's something I didn't mention, you know, Jack, that Devin's bringing out, is if you've got bad guy software attempting to open up ports and listen, whether your firewall allows it or not, this is going to give you an audit trail of it.
Yep.
So he says, so it's not just installed applications that create events. That's true. That's absolutely true. That would even be true in the case of remote reflective, that's the term, reflective memory injection, where with a buffer overflow and shellcode, you actually shove a whole DLL into a victim process and start running it without ever touching disk. And that's hard to detect unless you've got active code looking for RMI. But at the point that it starts opening up ports and accepting inbound connections, or even opening up initiating outbound connections, you would get an audit trail of that with these events. Very good point, Devin. I'm glad you called that out. One other question from some, sorry, Jack, am I cutting you off?
No, I just said thank you.
Oh, okay. Cool. Let's see here. Here's a good question. Do rootkits throw all these logs out the window? Pun intended. That's good. So I've never come across or heard of rootkits doing anything with the security log other than erasing it. It's very difficult. It takes some tremendous programming to get in and modify the contents of the security log once events are logged. And that is also why we want to get events off that system as fast as possible, so that in case we do get that kind of software, hopefully we get the events before it gets around to modifying or blocking the events from going there. But that is really hard to do. I've seen one example of it with an old utility from years ago called WinZapper, where it would come up, it would give you a list of all the events in the security log and ask you, all right, which ones do you delete? Want to delete? You could just delete specific events from the security log. But that required really low-level programming and DLL injection in order to make that work, because there is absolutely no API for modifying event data once it's logged. The only API out there is to clear the log, and that gets audited. If you clear the log, you'll end up with an empty log, but immediately an event afterwards saying that Bob or bad guy program or whatever cleared the log. And so if you clear that, then you get another event. So what I always like to say is you can cover up your tracks, but you can't cover up the fact that you covered up your tracks. Say that 5 times in a row.
Yep, that's one I actually have as a demo here in my lab as a real-time event. When the security event log gets cleared, the new event that appears generates a real-time alert.
Oh, now I like this question. Devin comes back and says, what I mean by rootkits is that since its job is to hide process information, its process information from the system, will Windows not even notice that a port bind has occurred? So that is theoretically possible. I mean, once you're in the kernel, you know, one of the fundamental rules of computer security is, you know, once you have root level access, you can do anything, provided you have the programming skill to do it. So if you know, what rootkits do is, you know, for the meta APIs that ask what are all the processes currently running, it intercepts that request, filters itself out of that list, and then sends the list on, sans information pointing to itself. So that would be the next step in the arms race, is for rootkits to start also intercepting requests well, that would be hard to do because it's not an API that we're intercepting. It would have to intercept the part of the kernel that writes that event to the Windows event log. And that's not impossible, but I think it would be a lot more difficult to do than what rootkits are doing right now, which is just hiding their process from the list of PIDs that come back from those APIs. But that's a little bit out of my league. That's more of a what Mark Rusanovich type of question. Okay, let's see here. Stephen has a question. He has a certain license. He'd like to know what his options are for using Server Manager, but I'm going to let you get back to him directly, Jack.
Sure.
And let's see here. Doug asks, does LogMinder have the ability to process these logs? So that's a different solution that doesn't it doesn't have anything to do with Windows Firewall, but it also does not replace what you see Server Manager doing. The LogMinder product is something that gets event logs out of applications that SIEM solutions can't get in the first place. And these Windows Firewall logs aren't anything like that. You can Server Manager can get those events directly. Let's see here. And I think we answered Luis's question. Can I use event logs to track application usage of firewall ports and configuration? And yeah, I think we talked about that. I think we demonstrated how you can do that. Well, I think we've gotten to the end of our questions. That was awesome, everybody. Thank you very much for your time. And Jack, thank you and Spectersoft for being willing to sponsor a webinar on a topic that I've never been able to cover with my audience before. I really appreciate that, and I think they do too.
Yes, and we appreciate it too, Randy. Thank you.
All right, folks, we'll be in touch with a link to the recording to this and a link to some of the other information that we talked about. And I hope that you take a look at Server Manager, because as you can see, you've got a load of functionality there, but it's something that is really affordable compared to a lot of the stuff that you see today. So nice work, Jack.
Yes, thank you. I look forward to hearing from as many of you guys as we can. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Yep, you as well.